Welcome to the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel. I'm Mark Gillespie. This podcast is a bit different than our weekly WhiskyCast podcasts. Each week we bring you news from around the world on new whiskeys, along with interviews with whiskey makers, writers, bar owners, and other people with great whiskey stories to tell. Here, though, you and whiskey lovers just like you are the stars. We gather a few whiskey lovers together, pour some drams, and they're the ones who do the tasting notes and scoring. I just keep the scores. This month, we gathered a panel at the New Brunswick Spirits Festival in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Later on, I'll tell you how you can join one of our tasting panels, but it's about time to turn things over to this month's panel. They'll be tasting 3 single malt Scotch whiskies, the Glenfiddich 15-year-old Solera Reserve, the Dalmore 12-year-old, and the Talisker 10-year-old. We'll meet the panels and start tasting in just a minute. Support for the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel comes from the Whiskey Exchange, one of the world's leading whiskey retailers, offering worldwide delivery with a range of more than 9,000 whiskeys and spirits. The Singh brothers, Sukhinder and Raj, opened the Whiskey Exchange back in 1999 with a simple philosophy: to offer the best whiskeys at competitive prices. You'll find everything from Amrut to Yamazaki on their website, including just about every single malt you can think of, and probably a few that you haven't, including their own single cask bottlings, like the new Art of Whiskey collection, and distillery exclusives from around the world. With the holidays coming up, check out their bespoke bottle engraving service, the Perfect Measure sample gift packs, or to keep Santa in a good mood, why not pick up a whiskey-filled bauble or two? The Whiskey Exchange was voted the 2017 Independent Spirits Retailer of the Year at the recent IWSC Awards, and the Huffington Post has called it Scotch Whiskey's Cathedral. If you're visiting London, stop by the shop in Covent Garden or visit them online at thewhiskeyexchange.com, along with Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. And thanks to the Whiskey Exchange for supporting the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel. Let's meet our tasting panel for this month's episode of the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel. We are recording this at the New Brunswick Spirits Festival in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and we have an all-Canadian tasting panel today. We'll start off on my far right with Rhonda Moore. Rhonda, we've followed each other on Twitter for a while now, but tell me how you got into whiskeys.
So I started drinking whiskeys at a really young age when I probably couldn't appreciate them fully, and began to take it much more seriously when I lived in Scotland. I did my master's there and was active in a couple of whiskey societies. And
where did it progress from there? Because that's a good place to learn about whiskeys, but you didn't stop when you came home, did you?
I did not. So I still have friends and family in Scotland, and they are very kind at storing stuff for me until I can get over, or bringing it with them to me when they come visit. And of course, I continue to source out whiskeys through the LCBO, through the SAQ in Quebec. And then when I'm out west, I take advantage of what we can get through Alberta.
Okay, thanks for joining us. Tanya Gracie, you just flew in from Ottawa, and I know that she drug you out here, didn't she?
She did, yes, she did. And she is part of my own whiskey story. So my time enjoying and appreciating whiskey is much shorter, only in the last couple of years, I would say. And it has started with close friends and family who have also appreciated it, and sort of finding my way into the space and what kinds that I enjoy. So last year about this time I was in Scotland, and certainly had an opportunity to taste and appreciate a lot more. And so it's still an evolving love.
Thanks for joining us. The third member of our panel is Tyrone Cotie from Halifax, Nova Scotia. And you lead one of the single malt clubs in Halifax, right?
Past president, actually, of the Association of Halifax Regional Scotch Enthusiasts, which is our official name.
And the acronym for this, you've joked about this before with me on Twitter.
Well, the acronym is ARSE. So when we get to know you really well, we use the acronym.
And how did you get involved in single malts and whiskeys to begin with?
I was traveling with co-workers, and we were in London. And I was doing, as most people do in London, I was drinking gin and tonic. And when about 10 feet away from me, one of my co-workers was drinking something that smelled like a bonfire to me. So I had to walk over and say, what in God's name is in that glass? And I think it was an Ardbeg at the time. And it got me a little bit interested. So when we came back to Nova Scotia, his brother invited me to a Scotch nosing with the club. Got the club's actually a bunch of ex-Navy, currently ex-Navy and Air Force. Really enthusiastic club, gets together once a month, tastes some really neat whiskeys, a little bit of education, a lot of fun. And I just love the whole thing. And what I loved about Scotch whiskey is the distilleries, the whiskeys are tied to towns and villages. And it's the history, it's the story, and it's what's not to love?
Well, thank you for joining us. We have 3 whiskeys to taste this time around. And we're going to start with the Glenfiddich 15. It is the glass on your far left. This, of course, is the Solera Reserve that works off the same principle as the Soleras in the sherry bodegas in Spain. This one is bottled at 40% ABV. And go ahead and get your nose in the glass there, and we'll see what you think on the nose. While you're nosing, I'll explain the scoring system. We score on a 5-point scale with half points acceptable. 1 score for the whiskey, combination with water and without water. We nose first, neat, then add a few drops of water or to your taste and come up with 1 score for the whiskey. We don't discuss the scores until the end to avoid any kind of peer influence. And at the end, I will tally up the scores and we'll come up with an average for each one and see which one comes out on top. So that said, what are we getting on the nose for the Glenfiddich 15?
Well, a little bit of berry, I believe. Always get a tiny bit of flint maybe when you have a sherry cask, but it's lovely.
I agree with the flint and a little bit of sweet.
Okay. Tanya?
So I have a bit of a unique story with this particular whiskey. So I went to the Glenfiddich distillery and we did a tour of the distillery, and at the end we spent some time and each person was able to try to recreate this. And so they gave us the 3 different types of whiskeys from the different casks, and then, with droppers and, all the measuring tools, tried to see if we could replicate it. And so it's very interesting to...
How close did you get?
Not as close as I thought I was at the time. So what it smelled like was much different than what it ended up being. But.
So what are you getting on the nose for this one, since you have some experience with this?
I actually find it quite soft. And for me, the sherry really stands out in this particular one.
Well, let's go ahead and taste it and see what you think there, and then we'll add some water in a few seconds here. And you were talking about the 3 different kind of casks. Of course, those are ex-sherry, ex-bourbon rather, and some new oak casks. They don't use a lot of those, but just a few, just to sort of add some spice to it. How does it taste? Tanya?
I still, even though I know the combination of it, I still don't think I could, just from the taste, would be able to replicate it. So.
But what does it taste like?
I find it to be an easy drinking whiskey. I don't find it strong. It's not. For me, it's nice and smooth, and it just sort of it sits nicely, and so yeah.
Okay, Rhonda.
So you definitely taste the sherry and a little bit of pepperiness with it, which I really like. I'm a big fan of sherry finishes. The bigger, the better, in my opinion. I love to have whiskeys like this and let them sit on my tongue until you can feel some of your taste buds literally feel like they're on fire. And so this one you have to hold a little bit longer for that, but very nice.
Tyrone?
So I have a little story about this cask as well, this bottle as well. I too, like you, I did the tour and went up to the Solera cask, and we had a chance to drop a whiskey thief in it and drink a little bit of right from the cask, and fell in love with the whiskey. Then I think to me it's the best of the core range. In terms of flavor, it's got a real creamy mouthfeel, a little bit of berries. There's definitely some grain in there, but the grain is really integrated really well. It's a lovely whiskey. Lovely whiskey. When my dad passed away a couple of years ago, I just bought him a 3-pack of Glenfiddich. He didn't get a chance to use it, so just after his funeral, we came back to our house with all our family and friends and cracked out the bottles and shared them around, and the 15 was the highlight, really.
Sounds like a good story. It's a shame, though, that he didn't get to drink it. Was that his personal whiskey of choice?
No, he wasn't a big whiskey drinker, actually. I was really getting into whiskey, so I was sharing it with him, and
okay.
He wasn't resisting.
That's the best way to do it, is to share it with friends and family. I'm not into collecting whiskeys. I just say I'm behind on my drinking. I'm not a collector, but the idea is to share it with friends and enjoy it. Let's add some water. You've got your eyedroppers there and some bottled water, and let's see what water does to this one. In just a second, we'll be tasting the Dalmore 12-year-old next. But let's see how the Glenfiddich 15 holds up with water. Rhonda, you're looking pensive over there.
So I just added a tiny little bit of water. My bias is that I rarely add water. My bias is I stick to neat usually. And on the first sip, I got a lot more of the grain and a lot more of the pepperiness. The water really brings that out, and kind of less of the sweet that you get early on the taste if you're drinking it neat. So I have to say I actually like this a lot better with a little bit of water.
Let's define the term here, because you've both used the term grain, and obviously there's no grain whiskey in this since it's a single malt. When you say grain, what are you referring to? The barley grain?
Yeah,
the maltiness?
Exactly. The cereal, I guess, perhaps is a better word.
Yeah. Agreed.
I just want to make sure we clarify that, because somebody's going to email and say, there should be no grain whiskey and that it's a single malt, for crying out loud.
Cereal.
So let's just sort of nip that in the bud right away.
Good catch.
Tanya, what does the water do for you?
I agree. The grain or cereal, however you want to describe it, is more prominent, but I actually like it better neat than I do with the water.
Does it take away from the flavor at all, Tyrone?
You know what? I've got a sweet tooth, and with a couple of drops of water, I got a little bit more of the sweet. So I actually liked it more with a few drops of water.
Okay.
There was a little element there that wasn't there before.
Do we like this one? Obviously, we've all got some history with this one. It's one of those ones that pretty much everybody that drinks a single malt has tried at least once or twice.
I do. I like this one. And again, being somebody that's still fairly new to whiskey, it's easy drinking, and I find that it's easy to share with people, both people who enjoy their whiskey and also people who are, more like myself and who are newer to enjoying and trying whiskey. So I find it quite versatile in that sense.
Any other thoughts on this one?
Oh, to me, it's one of the standard whiskeys you really should have in your cupboard, and it's where single malt started, right? So there's a wonderful story with Glenfiddich. This whiskey is it's accessible, but yet it's interesting. Mm-hmm. To me, it's just one that should be in the cupboard.
I agree with that, and I think it would be one of the first that I would bring out of the cupboard if I had someone who is not a whiskey drinker and wanted to try something, especially if they were apprehensive of peat. My cupboard tends to be it's stocked heavier on the peaty sides.
Okay, let's move on then. Go ahead and write down your score for the Glenfiddich 15-year-old Solera Reserve. And we will move on to the Dalmore 12-year-old. It's another one of those standbys that has been around for years, the Richard Patterson Classic. And this one is also bottled at 40% ABV. I suspect we're going to get some caramel notes on the nose, because that's sort of the Dalmore Classic, that sweet caramel note. But there's a little more depth to it as well. What are we getting on the nose?
With the heavy sherries, when you get into heavy sherries, to me, I get more Flint starting to, not quite as bad as much as gunpowder, but a lot more flint. You're right on the caramels as well, but definitely it's a bigger nose.
Rhonda?
I definitely the caramel. Something I would even go so far as to say like a hot sticky toffee. Like you can really smell the butter and and like for me there's a dense like cakiness to it.
The sticky toffee pudding.
Yeah.
My favorite dessert in Scotland.
Yeah, same here.
If I see that on the menu, it's automatically a good dinner, because I'll just go through whatever they have on the menu and just bring the STP for dinner, for dessert. That's all I need. Tanya?
I would agree. I was having a hard time placing it, but when Rhonda said buttery and toffee kind of, I thought, yep, that's what it is. So I would definitely agree with that.
Go ahead. I'm not going to stop you from tasting it. Now Tanya's the one looking pensive.
Yeah, I'm trying to pick up on how I would describe the flavor.
Anybody else want to jump in while she's taking a second sip?
So the flint that Tyrone mentioned he got on the nose, I didn't get on the nose, but I did in the taste. I found the Dalmore started off, like the taste built the longer you let it sit in your mouth. So at first it was a very soft introduction, and then it builds, and as it builds I got a lot more of the flint, and a lot less of the sticky toffee pudding I had got on the nose.
You know, in the mouthfeel, I could really feel it on my tongue and the sides of my mouth. Just feel that little prickle, which surprised me a little bit. It's funny because it's with sherry, you expect it to kind of grip your tongue more. It's more just kind of slides over your tongue a little bit. It's quite smooth.
Tanya, have you come up with...
I find it almost like dries out the back of my mouth a little bit. Like I have to take like an extra swallow or something afterwards. But it's not as sweet to the taste. But it's not peaty in any way, but it's just not as sweet to the taste.
Is it spicier? Is it a little more cloying, perhaps?
Yeah,
any idea what does it remind you of?
I don't know. That's what I'm trying to think of.
Okay.
There's a little bit of woody elements.
Maybe that's it.
You know, the astringency, that's the the drying you're getting too.
Yeah.
A lot of tannins, maybe?
Yeah. That's probably a better way to describe it, is a little slightly woody.
Maybe some water will help with this one. So the eyedroppers are in use again. And what does water do to this one?
Not a lot for me. Not a noticeable difference.
Does it hold up or does it fall apart?
I think it holds up.
Yeah, I think so.
I don't notice a huge change in the flavor profile, although after Tanya and Tyrone mentioned the woodiness, I don't think I picked it up quite as much as you two did, but I certainly didn't notice it at all once you add the water.
You do really notice, as you mentioned, the drying with this. This has got obviously a little more sherry content, and you really notice the drying in your tongue. So there's the flavor, but there's also the sensation, the tongue feel, or the mouth feel that you really get from this one.
Yeah.
Okay. Impressions overall?
For me, sherry's. I do love the sherry whiskeys, but they can get overplayed a little bit. Particularly, it can be really difficult with the peaty whiskeys when you're combining that with sherry. Dalmore obviously makes fantastic whiskeys, but for me, it's just a little bit more sherry than I like in the whiskeys. That's my personal.
I enjoy it. Again, I didn't find it as the drying was a little bit. For me, I probably wouldn't gravitate to it as much. I mean, I enjoyed it and would love a dram of it. I don't know if I would have multiples, but it was nice.
Is it the kind you'd buy a bottle of? That's the key, I think, is would you buy this one?
Respectfully, no.
No, I don't think so.
No.
Fair enough. Not every whiskey is for everybody. So let's move on. Our final whiskey is the Talisker 10-year-old, another longtime classic that I think is pretty much a staple in most whiskey cabinets. If it's not, it probably should be.
Oh, yeah.
Unless you just don't like smokiness at all.
No, this whiskey, when you smell it, they've got the balance just perfect. It's just a puff of smoke. It's not overwhelming at all. It just gets you interested in trying it and tasting it.
And this is our strongest one of the bunch, 45.8%. And this, of course, is another official distillery bottling. All three of the whiskeys this month are distillery bottlings. Okay, Rhonda, you're smiling over there.
I am. Talisker 10 is a staple in my whiskey cupboard, and it's one that it's usually what I would recommend as a standard for someone who wants to try a peaty whiskey who's never done it before. I agree with Tyrone, it's like just a little puff of smoke. It's not really overpowering or inaccessible. It's just really lovely. And for me, whiskey is also seasonal. So, I love peat and smoke, and I really love it in the fall and the winter. And in the spring and summer, I want something a little less peaty, but Talisker 10 is like a go-to anytime.
Tanya?
So this one was one for me at first that I found quite intimidating because it's got a big nose on it. And I thought, well, maybe this is beyond me. But back to what you said around, it's somewhat seasonal. So we had just been hiking in the region, and it was windy and raining, and Talisker was the closest place, and we ducked in, and everything tasted fabulous then, mostly because I was wet and freezing cold. But no, I think this is, it can be intimidating, but I don't think it needs to be because it's quite lovely.
It can be intimidating at first, and then you get really, really used to it really quickly.
Exactly.
It's got a wonderful balance, a tiny bit of salt in it. I agree for cold weather. They should, when you go to Canadian Tire to buy your snow shovel, they should give you a bottle of Talisker. It should just be a package, especially if you don't have a fireplace.
But that would be irresponsible of them to encourage it with drinking and driving, so we have to be careful about that.
But you'd be encouraging people to shovel, which is very healthy.
Okay, I'll give you that.
But it truly is a wonderful balanced whiskey. And you talk about maritime malts. And of course, we're close to maritime. That's a river, but in Halifax, we're definitely on the ocean, and so we eat a lot of seafood. And you think about oysters or some of the nicer shellfish, and you try to match it. Taking a little bit of Talisker and putting a few drops in with an oyster. It's just fantastic.
I wish I could do that, but I'm allergic to shellfish, so I can't do oysters. But found that out the hard way on Isla one year.
Oh, yeah.
But we've all tasted it. Let's add some water, if you haven't already. I think a few drops of water adds a little more complexity to this one, but I want to hear what you think.
You know what? For me, I found it diluted some of the fruitiness that without water, it seemed to have just a flavor burst exploding, and it's dulled a little bit of that flavor burst in the mouthfeel for me. And perhaps it's just because I love Talisker so much, I hate to take it away from its original form. It's so good.
I agree with you that the burst is not there, but for me, it lengthened the taste. It made a smokier, longer finish. So the taste is like it lasts longer, and I'm enjoying more of the smoke at the very end. Where when it was neat, it was like a quick finish and made me want. I would drink it more slowly if I put water in it because the taste lasts longer. Neat, I'm gonna plow right through that drink.
Tanya?
I agree. I think the water takes the smoke out of the nose and adds it to the finish.
Well, that's our 3 whiskeys for this month. We're going to take a short break, add up the scores, and come back and pick a winner. I suspect I know which one it's going to be, but I don't have any firm guesses on that one yet. We'll be right back. You're listening to the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel. We love whiskey clubs here at WhiskyCast, and as Tyrone Cotie mentioned during his introduction, he's part of a whiskey club in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Each month, we pick a Whisky Club of the month, and this month we're honoring the Cedar Valley Malt Manifesto in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Travis Schrage sent in a nomination for his club, which started 18 months ago with 4 original members, and now has more than 25 members tasting new whiskeys each month. We'll be sending Travis and his fellow whiskey lovers 24 WhiskyCast Glencairn glasses to use at their club tastings. Congratulations to the Cedar Valley Malt Manifesto, our Whisky Club of the month. If you have a Whisky Club, let us know about your group. We'll be glad to add a link to your website, Twitter feed, or Facebook page on the Whisky Club's page at whiskycast.com. All you have to do is email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com, and you just might win 24 WhiskyCast Glencairns to use at your club meetings. That address again is comments@whiskycast.com, and thanks to Glencairn Crystal for helping us honor the Whisky Club of the month. Welcome back to the WhiskyCast tasting panel. We have a verdict, and this one was closer than I thought it was going to be. We'll start at the bottom, and I guess we really shouldn't be surprised, since none of you said you were going to buy the Dalmore 12, that it came in third with a score of 2.6, a median score. But it was tight among the other two. The Glenfiddich had an average score of 3.8. The Talisker, 4s across the board. So the Talisker is technically our winner, but it was almost a pretty close tie. Tanya, you scored the Glenfiddich 4.5. That was the highest score of any. But I suspect that's because of your experience at the distillery and the history you have with this one. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is that. And I still, given where I am with my whiskey journey, I would say that I still lean towards the sort of softer, if you will, of the whiskeys. I like trying and, whiskeys like the Taliskers, but I don't necessarily think I have a full appreciation for them yet.
Rhonda, you scored the Talisker 4. That was your highest score. I guess we really shouldn't be surprised by that, given the place it has in your cupboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that we've been talking about whiskey tours, and I've been to the Talisker distillery and I've been to Glenfiddich. I've not been to Dalmore, so not that was a reason for giving it the score I did. But Talisker, it's such a beautiful place and it's such a great experience to tour it. And the Talisker 10 is such a consistently lovely, accessible, relatively lightly smoky dram. In scoring these, I was thinking about, what room these whiskeys would take up in my cupboard or what I could replace them with, which is maybe unfair to them. But the Talisker has that corner consistently, and it's just a really, really nice bottle.
And Tyrone, you also scored the Talisker highest.
Yeah, I did. And there's always emotional aspects with whiskey drinking. We talked about going to the place as well, but there's also your first. What was one of your first whiskeys you had, that you could drink and enjoy? And for me, Talisker was one of the first. And it was one of those ones you just taste and go, oh, wow, now I get it. Now I understand why people like Scotch whiskey. And it's not about drinking big drinks. It's about taking small sips and enjoying all that flavor profile. And it just had such a nice balance. So I think, you're always got a soft spot for your first one.
I often wonder if the results will be different if we did these blind.
Right.
And you didn't know what you were tasting.
Yeah.
Whether the Dalmore might have done better if you tried it blind.
Well, there's so much emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah, there really is.
We may have to do that on a future panel.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
It is.
Did you guys learn anything from this? Obviously, you've had experience with all of these whiskeys, so there's no surprises here, right?
You know what? I've never added water to Talisker 10. And I probably will from now on, actually. Really enjoyed how the water changed the taste.
Just to make it last longer?
Well, yeah, there's that too.
You could be an accountant like me.
Any final thoughts?
I tell you what, you asked about learning. I learned when I go to Isle of Skye and do some hiking around the Talisker area.
Tanya?
Okay. I'm still learning about how to identify the different aspects of the flavor profiles. So I always appreciate tasting with other people who have some experience in this and can, as they identify pieces, I can say, oh, yes, now that gives me a point of reference. And so.
Great. Well, thank you all for doing this. I hope you had as much fun with this as I did. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so
Brian.
much.
It's fun.
Once again, our panelists this month, Rhonda Moore, Tanya Gracie, and Tyrone Cotie. And we did the tasting at the New Brunswick Spirits Festival in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. Our special thanks go to the festival's organizers, the Fredericton Whisky Society, as well as the New Brunswick Department of Tourism, Heritage, and Culture, which provided production support for this month's episode. If you'd like to be on the panel for an upcoming episode of the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel, all you have to do is email us. The address is comments@whiskycast.com. And please put Tasting Panel in the subject line. Let us know where you live, and if you have Skype on your computer. That's how we bring our panelists together for our online virtual tastings. But if I'm going to be in your area, we might just bring some whiskey lovers together for an in-person tasting. The email address again, comments@whiskycast.com. Now that's also where you can share your comments about the show. And I hope you'll also share the WhiskyCast Tasting Panel podcast with your friends, too. You can also help other whiskey lovers discover the show by leaving reviews or ratings for us at Apple Podcasts, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget to join us each week for the latest whiskey news and more cask-strength conversation on WhiskyCast. The WhiskyCast Tasting Panel is brought to you by the Whiskey Exchange, offering worldwide delivery of more than 9,000 whiskeys and spirits, online at thewhiskyexchange.com. The WhiskyCast Tasting Panel is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2017. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.